Hi there. Now that we have 1 week of the course completed, I've had an opportunity to review some of the chapter reflections as well as some of the analyses presented in project number 1. And I thought I would take a few minutes here to debrief about what I've read through and what I've reviewed myself, and answer some of the questions that came up, as well as sort of set the stage for part 2 of the class. So I've got a few things that I wanted to just sort of reflect on and review with you right now. The first one has to do with just how this whole course operates, because I've had a few questions about that. So first of all, I want you to know that in addition to the course text, which I have included here for me in, I got the 3-hole punched version of the text. I don't know if any of you did that. But I also printed off from the course website, I printed off the syllabus, and that's right up front. And then after the syllabus, I have the course notes of the note packet, and I just went ahead and printed them off. You don't have to, of course. But I just wanted to remind you that the course notes are organized by the objectives that are going to be measured on the course exams. And so it's a very, very useful document to have. It focuses your attention on the important information that's going to be assessed outside of all the other things I want you to do regarding the course notes as well as the course text. So I have the note packet, and then after that I printed off, because this is just how I operate, I printed off the guide to developing effective selected and constructed response items. This is a guide you're going to use a lot later in the course, and you may even use it a lot in your job as an educator, because it's something that I use. Honestly, I really refer to it weekly in my job as an educator, both as a faculty member as well as an evaluation and assessment consultant. So I have it all. I have them all organized. That's just how I choose to do it. You could certainly keep everything digital. That's totally acceptable. But I also wanted to point out that something I didn't print off here, because I do keep it digital, are all of the chapter reflections. And you'll notice I went through it pretty quickly during the orientation video. You'll notice that up in the resources tab, there is a page that provides access to all of those chapter reflections, and you can download those as Word documents, and then just answer the questions and the little activities that are inside of that right in the Word document. Put your name on it, please, and then you can upload that directly into D2L once you complete that. And those chapter reflections, again, don't necessarily provide practice over the skills that are going to be measured on the exams, but they do provide you with an opportunity to process some of the important information from the course texts, and it helps you get more out of those experiences and what the author of the text thinks is important, are important takeaways for each of those chapters, because those documents were prepared by Popham, the author of the text. So I just wanted to let you know that that's how the course operates, and that's where you can access these resources. And of course, there are other resources in the resources tab that will become useful as the course progresses. So that's a little bit about course procedures. You don't have another project for quite a few weeks, and I'll be introducing the next project later once we get through the next 2 main parts of the class. The first week had to do with an introduction to the field of assessment, and now with week 2, you're heading into reading the first chapter that defines one of the most important characteristics about good assessments, and that is that they are reliable. But I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes, first of all, addressing some questions that came up in the reflection for the first chapter. So one of the questions that came up that some students had some issues with was when you were asked in chapter 1 to sort of complete this terse self-test about testing, You got to love the alliteration there. Item number 5 says you're supposed to rate your level of agreement with these statements. And statement 5 says, a teacher has no business measuring students' confidence in their ability to do schoolwork. And many of you agreed with that statement, or strongly agreed. And then the question was, well, why does the author think that a teacher does have a business measuring confidence? And that goes back to the definition of what assessments are, provided by the author. And that is, assessments are formal attempts to measure educational variables of interest. And it certainly is, or it certainly could be, an educator's interest to measure levels of confidence. It seems to me that in many situations, that would be a very important thing for teachers to to keep track of. Because confidence is something that teachers can actually address instructionally. You can improve student confidence for sure. And so, and because confidence does have an impact on performing other skills, it seems like it certainly could be a really good variable of interest to a teacher, a very important one. And then a couple of students said, well, that would be difficult, if not impossible, to measure someone's level of confidence. And the reality is it's not really that hard at all. You just have to ask them, how confident do you feel? How you could put a question on an exam that says, after they respond to an item, you could simply ask, how confident do you feel that your answer is comprehensive or is correct? That would certainly be a formal way to measure levels of confidence. And there are other ways too, and we'll get into some of those later in the course. But again, it has to do with variables of interest. And oftentimes teachers may not consider things like confidence as something that they feel that they want to assess, because they regard assessments and testing as things that are strictly academic. And that just couldn't be further from the truth. Good assessments measure any variables that you are interested in as an educator. So that was number 5. Another one that came up that was a problematic statement for some students was the last one on the TERS test, and that was, significant classroom tests should typically be built before a teacher plans instruction. And many students felt that, or they disagreed with that statement, that assessments are created after the instruction is sort of completed and takes place. I presume that's because they're considering that they only want to test over things that were addressed in class. And that's where the problem lies, right there. It's certainly okay to take an assessment and remove items before you administer it if there were some things that you feel as a teacher your learners did not have a good enough opportunity to practice. And you wanted to implement an assessment at a particular time, and that you had a schedule for that. But the reality is, when you begin the process of planning instruction, the first thing you do is articulate to yourself, well, what exactly do I want my students to learn, or to learn how to do, as a result of the experiences that I'm going to plan for them? So what do I want them to learn? What do I want them to learn how to do? And then you say, okay, well, how am I going to know that they learned it? How am I going to measure that? That's the first thing in your brain. How do I know? And that is the assessment development process right there. So you do that first, and then you then create your learning experiences to maximize the probability that everybody in the class is going to be able to successfully perform the skills, apply the knowledge, or possess the attitudes that you specifically want them to. I'll go back to the confidence item, for example. Here's how that works. So let's say that you're a math teacher, okay? And in addition to be able to performing certain math skills, you want students to feel confident in their ability maybe to apply certain math skills to new situations. You want them to feel confident. Well, so you write some items, and you say simply, you say, okay, well, here's some of the math application word problems that I'm going to ask, and then I'm going to say I'm going to ask them how confident are they that their answers to the word problems are correct. And confidence is, again, it's something that you can actually help students learn and acquire higher levels of as part of the instructional experience. It could just be providing them with additional opportunities to practice. And so you're going to make sure that you include those. You're going to make sure that you include more word problems, whereas you might not have, because you know that in order to feel confident applying something, you have to feel like you've had an opportunity or opportunities to practice that. And so the fact that you already know you're going to be measuring those levels of confidence, and you want them to be high for everybody, you're going to make sure when you do your instructional planning that you formally and specifically address levels of confidence as part of the experiences. So, and there are lots of other experiences, and that's if you say, well, that just sounds like teaching to a test. Well, you're doing that anyway. You're helping somebody learn the skills you want them to learn forever as a result of your instructional interventions. And when you go to plan that, of course you're going to already have an idea in your head of how you're going to be able to tell that they actually learned what you want them to. You already have that in your head. You're already teaching to a test if the test is really good, you know. So, and is faithful to what it is you want them to learn how to do. So that's a little bit about some of the reflections that came up, some common issues for the analyses you did after reading the first chapter. So then so now I want to talk just a little bit about project number one, and that is, if you recall, you performed 3 formal assessments that some people might take in the real world outside of school, and I asked you to do things like reflect on whether or not you felt the items did a good job of measuring what they were supposed to measure, and that's really the key to one of the most important aspects of what a good assessment is. So let me just review that a little bit. So you have questions on citizenship, if you recall, and one of the things you had to reflect on was, well, is that a good measure of for citizenship? Those kinds of questions, and if you really get under the hood to that kind of sort of analysis, it's really kind of interesting, because you would think that what you would want in a good assessment for citizenship is some kind of measure regarding the potential success that somebody might have to be a good citizen, in a good U.S. citizen. And then you're stuck thinking, well, what is a good U.S. citizen? Is it somebody who follows the rules and is a participant in the democracy? So they choose to vote and to be to educate themselves on the issues. Is that what makes a good citizen? Is a good citizen just somebody who's going to be kind and respectful to other people in society? I mean, if those are the things that would measure whether or not someone could or should be a citizen of the U.S., then it seems to me that some of the items, or maybe all the items on the citizenship test, really don't measure that at all. It seems to me that what they really measure, or what they are really measuring, is some basic fundamental sort of literacy. Literacy about, do you understand these questions that are written in English? and maybe some basic literacy about how the government works, whether or not what percent of the vote in Congress will get a law passed. That might or might not, in my opinion, being literate about that, I'm not so sure that there's a direct line between that and being a successful citizen. But there might be more of a direct line in terms of your ability to understand the common language of the land, perhaps. Though goodness knows, we all know that does not define what constitutes someone who can be a success in our society, or even be happy here, or that we all can't benefit from somebody in our world who doesn't speak English very well. So anyway, questions like that were asked so that you could just think about, well, what does make a good assessment? And you can't answer that question, first of all, until you understand what the actual purpose is of the assessment. So what's its purpose? And then you can look at these items and say, well, do they do a good job of measuring that? And what are the chances that whatever score that they get on that assessment, or however they do, that's really going to reflect the thing, that the purpose or the thing that you want to be measuring in the first place? And related to that, I brought up the idea of you determining whether or not you felt there were opportunities for either type 1 errors or type 2 errors. Type 1 errors being what are called false positives. And that is, somebody does well on an assessment, so they do well, but it turns out they really can't do the thing that you want them to be able to do. So going back to the citizenship test, they do really well on the citizenship test, 100%, yet they go out into society and they become destructive or a burden. That would be a type 1 error. Or probably more realistically, somebody doesn't do well on that assessment, maybe because of language issues, but the reality is they would make perfect citizens for America. Probably the same kind of citizens that we had when we were settling this country and really embracing the immigrants who created a good part of this country. So that's type 1 and type 2 error. Now, perhaps it's even easier to consider when you consider the Department of Motor Vehicles test. So again, you have to look at, well, what's the purpose of that written test for the DMV? It certainly has to do with interpreting the meaning of common road signs and some basic rules of the road. But would it be possible to do well on that test and yet be a really, really bad and almost dangerous driver? Well, certainly. Again, that would be a type 1 error. A type 2 error would be somebody who can't seem to pass those tests, who can't seem to recall the particular meaning of the shape of a sign or the color of a sign or something like that. And yet they're very attentive drivers and they interpret the rules of the road very, very, very well. That would be a type 2 error. They can't pass the test, but they would be a safe and competent driver. Again, a test like that written test makes you just wonder, okay, well, what's its purpose? Certainly it doesn't have anything to do with measuring your ability to operate a motor vehicle, like the actual operation of it, to be able to brake appropriately, make turns appropriately, park appropriately, that kind of thing. That would be a different kind of a test, obviously. But so you were asked to reflect on that. So one of the things about some of these tests is that they were all exclusively what we call selected response tests. So those are tests in which, like multiple choice, where you have to select the best possible answer. And there are lots of things that you can do as someone who writes those items or creates them. There are a lot of things you could do to minimize somebody having a type 1 error. That is, being able to guess the correct answer without really knowing the correct answer. There are things you could do to write assessment items to minimize that, or vice versa. There are things you can do to write items so that if somebody doesn't answer them well, that means they really don't know how to do the thing that you want them to be able to do. And that's not always the case. It's really common for somebody in a social studies class, for example, to be asked to respond to an essay item, and the reality is their writing skills are not great, but their understanding of the fundamental concepts that are trying to be measured are really good. And so what's really being assessed is their ability just to write. And that's a classic example of a type 2 error. So they're going to get the item wrong, a low score on it. But the reality is they understand the concepts maybe better than anybody else in the class. So that speaks to the quality of a good assessment. And so as we progress in this class, you're going to learn that there are some basic fundamental concepts that the rules of good assessments support. And one of them, which is going to be addressed in the coming week now, week 2, is reliability. And reliability is simply that whatever assessment you give, if it's effective, it should be able to consistently measure the skills that you want them to measure. Whether it's administered this year to a group of students, or next year, or the year after, that it consistently does a good job of measuring what you want it to measure. Because I'll use a really good example that doesn't have anything to do with academics, but it certainly is something that we're dealing with right now, and that is rapid COVID tests, right? So if you're lucky, you can go to the pharmacy right now and get some rapid COVID tests, or have them sent to you in the mail right now. And one thing you've probably heard about is that there is a probability that when you take a test that you're going to it's either going to be a type 1 or a type 2 error. Like it's going to be a false positive. It's going to show you that you have COVID when in fact you don't, or a type 2 error, which is a false negative, and that is it says you don't have COVID, but the reality is that you do. So let's just say that you took one rapid COVID test, and you got the results back. It shows either that you have COVID then or you don't. How accurate is that test? How reliable is it? How valid was that test? Well, you don't really know with one test, but let's say that you had 10 tests and you took them all at the same time. If it was a highly reliable and highly valid test, you would get they would all say the same thing, either all yes you have it, or all no you don't, and then you'd have to cross match that with some other really good test, a more comprehensive one, maybe a blood test that would show that, okay, well, all of those tests were they were all valid. They weren't exposed to something, or maybe they all got heated up too much in transit, or froze or something. But let's say that you took 10 tests and 6 of them said you were positive and 4 of them said that you were negative for COVID. Is that accurate enough for you? I don't think that it would be. I don't think it would be accurate enough for anybody. And so if that were the case, those tests probably wouldn't be administered. So we as educators, we need to draw the line at what we think, like at what level are we going to accept as being accurate or valid on testing. And so usually it's something on the order of, 95 times out of 100, the test accurately measures what it's supposed to measure. That's a good measure of validity and how reliable something is. So that's it. We're heading into the second week of class, and again, you're going to read through chapter 3 this week. There's no project due, and I hope you appreciate the importance of chapter 3, and that you also appreciate the reflections. So get that, complete that, and I will be spending the rest of this week grading and reviewing everything from last week. So onward we go.